Agnosticism means simply that a person does not claim to know whether any God or higher power exists. It is a way of saying that the answer is unknown, not that the person has decided the answer one way or the other. In everyday life, it is like looking at a sky that could be sunny or cloudy and saying, "I do not know yet." The word itself was first used in the 1860s by a biologist named Thomas Henry Huxley. He chose the term to describe his own position on the big questions about religion and science. Huxley wanted a word that meant, "I do not know," without sounding like a denial. He wrote, "I am an agnostic, and I shall not be ashamed of it." That short line shows the calm honesty at the heart of the idea. The idea of not knowing is not new. Long before Huxley, people in many cultures asked whether the world had a maker. What changed in the 19th century was the rise of modern science. New experiments showed that the Earth was older than many religious stories said. New ideas about evolution showed that living things could change without a divine plan. In that climate, Huxley felt that the old answers did not match the new evidence. He argued that it was better to admit uncertainty than to claim certainty without proof. He said, "The great tragedy of science, the slaying of a beautiful hypothesis by a better one, is not a tragedy at all, but a triumph of the human mind." In that way, agnosticism became a way to keep the mind open. One early public moment that showed how agnosticism entered public debate happened in a Victorian lecture hall in London in 1869. Huxley was invited to speak after a sermon that declared the certainty of God's existence. The audience was split. Some clapped when Huxley said, "I cannot claim knowledge of the divine." Others whispered that he was being cowardly. The debate lasted for weeks in newspapers. One writer, John Morley, wrote, "If we are to speak honestly, we must admit that the question of God is beyond our reach." That sentence captured the mood of many educated Victorians. They wanted truth, but they also wanted comfort. Comfort is one of the main reasons people choose a belief. A common counterargument to agnosticism says that belief in a God gives people peace, hope, and a sense of purpose. It is said that without that belief, life can feel empty. The argument is that the human mind needs a story, and agnosticism leaves a gap. In response, agnostics often point to the same need for honesty. They say, it is better to live with a clear mind than to fill the unknown with a story that may be false. A real-world example can be seen in a courtroom. A juror who says, "I do not know whether the defendant is guilty," is following the law that requires proof, not personal comfort. The same idea can be applied to the question of God. Without evidence, the honest answer is, "I do not know." Another counterargument claims that saying, "I do not know," is itself a belief that the world is unknowable. Critics say that agnosticism hides a hidden certainty, that knowledge is impossible. In reply, many agnostics draw a line between unknowable and currently unknown. They argue that the future may bring new evidence, just as scientists once thought the Earth was flat and later learned it is round. The stance is not that knowledge can never be reached, but that it has not been reached yet. This subtle difference matters because it keeps the door open for future discovery. To help listeners understand the idea, two simple analogies are useful. First, think of a weather forecast. A meteorologist looks at clouds, wind, and temperature, then says, "There is a 60% chance of rain tomorrow." The forecast does not claim certainty. It admits that the weather could be different. A person who says, "I am agnostic," is like a meteorologist who says, "Based on what we know, the chance of a God existing is unknown. Both are honest about the limits of their data. Second, imagine a blindfolded taste test. A person is given a spoonful of food and asked to name the flavor. If the taste is unfamiliar, the person can only say, "I do not know what this is." The answer is not a denial that the flavor exists. It is simply a statement of lack of knowledge. In the same way, an agnostic says, "The question of a higher power is like an unfamiliar taste. I cannot name it yet." These analogies show that agnosticism is not a refusal to think, but a careful way of thinking. It fits well with scientific practice, where hypotheses are tested and accepted only when evidence is strong enough. In everyday life, many people act like agnostics without naming it. A child asks, "Will it snow tomorrow?" And the parent replies, "I don't know, but we will see." That simple exchange mirrors the agnostic stance, a willingness to wait for evidence. Real-world applications of agnosticism appear in education, politics, and personal decision-making. In schools, teachers who adopt an agnostic approach encourage students to ask questions and seek evidence, rather than presenting any single answer as absolute. In politics, leaders who admit uncertainty about complex issues, such as climate change policy, can build trust by showing they are guided by data, not by dogma. In personal health, a person who is unsure about a new diet might say, "I need more research before I decide," which is an agnostic habit applied to everyday choices. Modern thinkers have taken the original idea and given it new shapes. Some call themselves weak agnostics, meaning they think the question may be answerable someday, but not now. Others use the term strong agnostics, meaning they think the question may be forever beyond human reach. Richard Dawkins, a well-known evolutionary biologist, often critiques agnosticism. He writes, "Agnosticism is a polite way of saying, I cannot prove God does not exist, but I also cannot prove he does." Dawkins argues that this stance gives unnecessary space to ideas that lack evidence. He prefers a more direct claim that there is no credible evidence for a God. His criticism pushes the conversation forward, forcing agnostics to clarify whether they are simply waiting for proof or actively rejecting claims that lack support. The modern debate also includes philosophers like Michael Martin, who wrote, "Agnosticism is not a belief system. It is a method of inquiry." Martin's view aligns with the idea that agnosticism can be a tool for critical thinking. It can be used in any field where claims are made without proof, from medical claims about miracle cures to political promises about economic miracles. By treating each claim as a question, the agnostic method helps avoid being swept along by hype. Historical anecdotes help illustrate how agnosticism has moved through culture. One story comes from a popular radio show in the United States in 1938 called The Unanswered Question. The host, a journalist named Margaret Hall, invited listeners to call in and share their thoughts on the existence of a higher power. One caller, a farmer from Iowa, said, "I pray when I need help, but I also admit I do not know if there is a listening ear." Hall responded, "That is the honest way to live, and it is the way agnostics speak." The program sparked a flood of letters, many of which thanked Hall for giving a voice to those who felt caught between belief and doubt. The show demonstrated that agnosticism could be part of everyday conversation, not just a philosophical term. Another anecdote dates back to the early 1900s, when a group of scientists gathered at a seaside resort in Cornwall for a weekend of discussion. The meeting was informal, but the central topic was the relationship between science and religion. One of the participants, a chemist named Edith Clark, stood up and said, "We have learned how atoms behave, but we have not learned how the universe began." She concluded, "Until we have evidence, I will stay agnostic." The remark was recorded in the minutes of the meeting and later quoted in a popular science magazine. The story shows that even a century ago, educated people chose to keep an open mind. Agnosticism also shows up in legal language. In the United States Supreme Court case of Torcaso v. Bickle, 1961, the court ruled that the government cannot require a belief in God as a condition for holding public office. The decision included language that the Constitution does not require any religious test. While the case does not label anyone as agnostic, the principle that the state must stay neutral about belief echoes the agnostic respect for uncertainty. The law protects those who say, "I do not know," just as it protects those who say, "I know." The everyday language of agnosticism can be heard in simple statements. A student might say, "I am not sure if the math problem has a solution, so I will ask the teacher." A shopper might say, "I do not know if this brand is better, so I will read reviews." Both are practicing agnosticism. They admit a gap in knowledge and seek more information. The habit of saying, "I do not know," can be a healthy antidote to the rush to judge. In literature, characters often embody an agnostic outlook. In a novel set in the 1920s, the main character, a journalist named Arthur, writes in his diary, "I have heard sermons that promise heaven, but I have also heard science that explains the stars. I keep my mind open, for I have no proof either way." The line captures the calm acceptance that defines the philosophy. It also shows that agnosticism can be a personal narrative, not just a public stance. The question of whether agnosticism is a belief itself can be explored through a simple thought experiment. Imagine a person standing in a dark room with a closed door. The person can either say, "I think the room is empty," "I think the room is full," or "I do not know what is behind the door." The third choice does not assert a belief about the room. It only states the current lack of evidence. In the same way, an agnostic does not claim that the universe is definitely without a God, nor does the agnostic claim that a God definitely exists. The agnostic simply says, "The evidence does not let me decide." Critics who say that agnosticism is a comfort zone often point to the fact that many people use the term to avoid thinking deeply. They claim that saying, "I don't know," can become a habit that stops further inquiry. In response, agnostics point to the practice of scientific skepticism, where the default position is to withhold belief until evidence appears. The difference lies in the willingness to change the answer when new data arrives. An agnostic who later sees convincing evidence would move from "I do not know" to "I think the." The story of doubt begins far before any formal religion took shape. In the earliest villages, people looked at the world and asked questions that had no easy answers. A child might point at the blue sky and wonder why the heavens are not black all the time. A farmer might watch the seasons turn and ask why the rain comes in some years and not in others. Those simple moments of wonder are the first seeds of agnosticism, the idea that some things cannot be known for sure. In ancient Greece, a group of thinkers called the skeptics made doubt a way of life. The most famous of them was Pyrrho of Elis. Pyrrho lived in the 3rd century BCE and travelled with Alexander the Great's army. He saw many different cultures and their gods. When he returned home, he began to teach that no belief could be proved beyond doubt. He said that the best way to live was to suspend judgment, to keep the mind open and calm. One of his sayings, recorded by later writers, is simple: "Nothing is certain." In this short line, Pyrrho invites anyone who hears it to stop claiming certainty about the gods or about any hidden truth. The skeptics did not work alone. In the same era, the Library of Alexandria buzzed with debate. Scholars from many lands gathered there, and they often argued about the nature of the divine. One recorded discussion took place between a philosopher who defended the traditional gods and a young student who had just heard Pyrrho's ideas. The student asked, "If the gods are unseen, how can we know they exist?" The philosopher answered, "Because the priests have spoken, and the people have felt their presence." The student replied, "But feeling can be tricked, and speaking can be taught." This exchange, written on a papyrus fragment, shows how doubt entered the public arena. It also shows that doubt was not just a private feeling, but a topic of open conversation. At the same time, far to the east, Buddhist monks were asking similar questions. In the early centuries of the Common Era, monks in India began to examine the idea of gods. The Buddha himself taught that the world is made of causes and effects, not of divine will. He said, "All things are impermanent. All things change." In a short dialogue recorded in the Pali Canon, a monk asks the Buddha, "Do the gods control what happens to us?" The Buddha answers, "The gods may hear prayers, but they do not make the law of birth and death. Those laws belong to the mind and its habits." This teaching does not deny that gods exist, but it says that they are not the ultimate answer to why things happen. In this way, early Buddhist thought also planted a seed of agnosticism, a quiet acceptance that some questions may stay unanswered. Both the Greek skeptics and the early Buddhist monks used everyday life to illustrate their ideas. The child who asks why the sky is blue can be seen as a small philosopher. The child looks up, sees the bright color, and wonders whether a god painted it. The answer, according to the skeptics, might be that the sky looks blue because of the way light bends in the atmosphere. The answer, according to the Buddhist teacher, might be that the color is a result of causes that we can study, not a sign of a divine painter. In either case, the child learns that asking is more important than receiving a final answer. The farmer who watches the seasons is another living example. The farmer knows that planting wheat in spring and harvesting in autumn brings food. He also sees years when the rain fails or comes early. He may pray to a rain god, hoping for help. Yet, after many cycles, the farmer also learns to read the clouds, to understand the soil, and to store grain for hard times. He learns that the world follows patterns that can be observed, not just patterns that are declared by priests. The farmer's practical knowledge shows that doubt can lead to better preparation and deeper respect for the natural world. Not everyone welcomed this growing spirit of doubt. As organized priesthoods grew stronger, they saw doubt as a threat. In many city-states, priests controlled the temples, the festivals, and the law. They argued that if people stopped believing in the gods, the social order would crumble. One priest from the city of Miletus, quoted by later historians, said, "When the people stop fearing the gods, they stop fearing the law, and the city falls into chaos." This claim reflects a fear that doubt weakens community bonds. The priesthood claimed that shared belief kept the people united, like a rope that holds many hands together. A second counterargument came from the political leaders of the time. In the Hellenistic kingdoms, rulers often used religion to legitimize their power. A king might say, "The gods have chosen me to rule." If subjects began to doubt, the king's claim would lose its shine. A royal decree from the court of Ptolemy V, preserved on a stone slab, reads, "Let no man question the gods, for the stability of the realm depends on the faithful worship of the divine." This statement shows how doubt was seen as a danger to the very structure of society. Even with these warnings, doubt continued to spread. The Library of Alexandria debates illustrate how doubt can coexist with learning. Scholars there did not shy away from questioning the gods. They invited others to do the same. One famous story tells of a mathematician who asked the chief priest, "If the heavens are a perfect sphere, why do we see stars move in different ways?" The priest answered, "Because the gods move the heavens as they wish." The mathematician replied, "Or perhaps the stars move because of natural laws we have yet to understand." The conversation ended without a clear winner, but it left the audience thinking that both divine will and natural explanation could be explored together. A later anecdote comes from a medieval monk named Brother Anselm, who kept a journal in a small monastery in the Alps. In the year 1123, he wrote, "Today I heard a traveller speak of distant lands where people pray to many gods, yet they also study the stars and the herbs. I find my heart torn between the comfort of the familiar chants and the curiosity that the world may hold more than the words of our abbot." In another entry a month later he noted, "I have begun to write questions in the margins of the Holy Book. Who made the Maker? Does the wind answer prayers, or does it simply move because of heat? I fear these questions may bring me trouble, yet they also bring me a strange peace." Brother Anselm's journal shows that doubt was not only a Greek or Indian phenomenon. It also lived in medieval Europe, where monks sometimes whispered their doubts in the quiet of the night. These stories, quotes, and examples help to paint a picture of early religious uncertainty. The child's question, the farmer's observation, the Greek skeptic's calm suspension of belief, the Buddhist monk's focus on cause and effect, the priest's warning about social order, and the monk's secret journal all point to a common thread. People have always sensed that some mysteries may stay beyond clear answer. They have also felt that asking, even without a firm answer, can bring a kind of calm. The early skeptics and Buddhist teachers did not claim that all belief was wrong. Instead, they suggested a middle path. They taught that it is better to admit not knowing than to cling to a belief that cannot be proved. Pyro's advice to suspend judgment can be heard as a gentle invitation to sit with uncertainty, much like a child sits quietly watching clouds drift. The Buddha's teaching that things change invites people to see that even if a God exists, that God may not control every detail. Both approaches encourage a calm mind, a core value of the channel called Snooze philosophy. Modern readers can see these ancient ideas in everyday life. When a person looks up at a night sky and wonders whether the stars are placed there by a creator or by natural forces, the question is the same as the one asked by the mathematician in Alexandria. When a farmer uses weather apps to predict rain instead of only praying, the farmer follows the same path of observation that early skeptics praised. When a student reads a science book and then asks, "What if there is more to the story?" the student is echoing the monk's journal entry. The ancient doubts also remind us that questioning does not have to break a community. In many places, groups have learned to hold both belief and doubt together. The early Buddhist Sangha, a community of monks, allowed members to discuss the nature of the divine without fear of expulsion. The Greek agora, the public square, was a place where anyone could speak, even if they doubted the gods. These spaces show that doubt can be a bridge, not a wall, when people create room for conversation. In the end, the roots of doubt stretch back to the very first moments people looked at the sky or tended a field. The child who asks why the sky is blue, the farmer who watches the seasons, the skeptic who says nothing is certain, the monk who teaches impermanence, the priest who warns of chaos, the king who claims divine right, the scholars in Alexandria, and the medieval monk who writes secret questions, all are part of the same long story. Their voices echo through history, reminding each listener that it is okay to sit with a question, to feel the tension of not knowing, and to keep searching for understanding, even when the answer stays out of reach. The next chapter will follow how these early doubts grew into more formal ideas about knowledge and belief, shaping the way later philosophers talked about what can be known and what must remain a mystery. For now, the listener can rest with the thought that doubt has always been a quiet companion on the road of human thought, guiding people to look deeper, to listen more closely, and to live with a gentle curiosity about the world. The story of modern agnosticism begins where science and reason meet the mystery of the unknown. It is a story that moves from the first telescopes to the latest particle experiments, and it is a story that asks what can be known and what must stay hidden. In the calm voice of a gentle narrator, the scene opens with a simple question. How does a mind that trusts data deal with a world that still holds secrets? The answer is not a single line, but a web of ideas, experiments, and doubts that have grown over the last half-century. In the 1960s, a crowd gathered in a bright hall at a press conference after a giant metal bird had landed on the moon. The astronauts stepped out, and the world heard the words of a scientist who spoke about the thin line between fact and wonder. The scientist said, "We have put a man on the moon, and yet we still do not know why the universe exists." That moment showed that even the greatest triumphs of science leave room for questions that cannot be answered by instruments alone. The press conference became a quiet lesson for agnostics. Achievement does not erase mystery. A few decades later, a televised debate on evolution aired in the 1990s. A biologist and a theologian faced each other on a bright stage, each holding a microphone and a belief. The biologist, a follower of Stephen Jay Gould, argued that the fossil record tells the story of change that can be measured and tested. The theologian, holding a book of faith, claimed that some truths lie beyond the reach of any test. The audience saw a clash of two ways to see the world, and they also saw a middle path that refused to pick a side. That middle path is what modern agnosticism often looks like. A willingness to accept the power of science while admitting that some questions may stay unanswered. Key thinkers of this modern age give shape to that middle path. Carl Sagan, the astronomer who turned the night sky into a story for millions, wrote in his book Cosmos that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. He also said, "Science is more than a body of knowledge. It is a way of thinking." Sagan's words are a guide for those who want to keep an open mind. He never claimed that science could answer everything, but he trusted that careful observation and testing could push the borders of what is known. His calm tone and love for wonder made him a favorite of people who felt uneasy about absolute certainty. Stephen Jay Gould, a paleontologist and historian of science, added another layer. In his essay, Non-Overlapping Magisteria, Gould wrote, "Science and religion occupy separate domains of teaching authority." He argued that science deals with facts and testable ideas, while religion deals with meaning and moral values. This view gave agnostics a way to respect both realms without forcing them to fight. Gould also warned against the idea that science could become a new religion. He said, "Science is not a faith, but a method." Those words remind listeners that belief in data is not the same as belief in a deity. Both Sagan and Gould help shape the modern agnostic view that science is a powerful tool, but not a magic wand. Their ideas are used in everyday examples that make the abstract feel real. Imagine a scientist in a lab testing a new medicine. The scientist designs a trial, gives the drug to some patients, and a placebo to others. The results show whether the drug works better than chance. The scientist can say the data support the drug's effect, but cannot claim that the drug will cure every disease forever. The test may fail, the virus may mutate, and new problems may appear. The scientist must stay open to the fact that some outcomes remain unknown until the next experiment. Now picture a student taking a multiple-choice test. The question is hard, and the student does not know the answer. The student guesses. The guess may be right, or it may be wrong. The student learns that not all knowledge comes from certainty. Sometimes a choice is made with limited information. The student's experience mirrors the agnostic stance. One can act based on the best evidence while accepting that some things are still hidden. These two simple scenes show how modern agnosticism lives in daily life. It is not a lofty theory that stays in a library. It is a habit of thought that guides how people treat data, how they make decisions, and how they talk about the unknown. The habit is to ask, what do we know? And then, what do we not know? It is a habit that respects the power of reason, but also honors the limits of what can be measured. Modern agnosticism also faces two strong counterarguments. The first claim comes from a confident strand of scientific optimism. Some scientists say that every big question, from the origin of the universe to the nature of consciousness, will eventually be answered by better tools and deeper theories. They point to the history of physics, where Newton's laws gave way to Einstein's relativity, and then to quantum mechanics. They argue that the gaps we see now are only temporary. If that claim is true, then agnosticism would be a stopgap, a placeholder, until the final answer arrives. The counterpoint to this claim is that history shows not only progress, but also persistent mysteries. Dark matter, for example, remains invisible even as detectors become more sensitive. The fact that some questions have lasted for centuries suggests that some limits may be built into the way humans perceive reality. The second claim comes from many religious voices. They say that faith steps in where science stops. When a person looks at the night sky and feels awe, faith offers a story that fills the gap. When a person faces pain or loss, faith gives comfort that data cannot provide. This view holds that science cannot answer why we have purpose or why moral values exist, and that those answers belong to a higher realm. Modern agnostics listen to this claim and often respond by saying that purpose and meaning can be explored through philosophy, art, and human connection, not only through divine revelation. They may also point out that faith sometimes makes claims that can be tested, and when those claims fail, the faith must be re-examined. Real-world applications of modern agnostic thinking appear in policy, education, and personal choices. In public health, officials must decide how to allocate limited vaccines during a pandemic. The data may show that a certain group is at higher risk, but the exact long-term effects of a new vaccine may still be unknown. An agnostic approach would support the best use of current evidence while continuing to monitor outcomes and adjust policies as new data appear. In education, teachers may present evolution as the best scientific explanation for biodiversity, while also acknowledging that some philosophical questions about meaning remain open. This creates a classroom where students learn to think critically without feeling forced to accept a single worldview. Modern interpretations of agnosticism also draw on new ideas from physics and biology. Quantum mechanics tells that particles can be in many states at once until measured. Some agnostics use this as a metaphor for belief. A claim can hold several possibilities until evidence forces a choice. In biology, the concept of epigenetics shows that genes are not a fixed script, but can be switched on or off by the environment. This reminds agnostics that knowledge is not a static block, but a living process that changes with context. Both fields reinforce the idea that certainty is rare, and that humility is a better guide. Analogies help listeners feel the shape of these ideas. Think of a map of a city. The map shows streets, parks, and rivers, but it does not show the smell of fresh bread from a bakery or the sound of a child laughing in a playground. The map is useful for navigation, yet it cannot capture every detail of the lived experience. Modern agnosticism treats scientific knowledge like a map. It guides, it informs, but it does not claim to contain the whole picture. Another analogy is a lighthouse. The light warns of rocks and guides ships, but the sea beyond the beam remains dark. The lighthouse does not pretend to know what lies far out, it simply offers a safe path as far as it can. Historical anecdotes add color to the story. In 1969, after the moon landing, a journalist asked the mission director, "Did you ever doubt that you could reach the moon?" The director replied, "We had doubts, but we tested each part, one by one, until the doubts became small enough to act." This shows that doubt can be a driver of careful work, not a sign of weakness. In 1994, during the TV debate on evolution, a viewer called in and said, "I am not a scientist, but I see the fossils change over time." The host responded, "Your observation is part of the evidence we all share." The moment reminded the audience that ordinary observation can support scientific ideas, even when the deeper mechanisms are complex. Quotes from primary sources give the script a solid voice. Carl Sagan wrote in The Demon-Haunted World, "Science is a way of thinking much more than it is a body of knowledge." Stephen Jay Gould wrote, "The conflict between science and religion is a myth. The real conflict is between the desire for certainty and the reality of uncertainty." These lines echo through the modern agnostic conversation, reminding listeners that the goal is not to win a battle, but to keep a clear mind. The modern agnostic also looks at the way language shapes thought. Words like proof and belief carry heavy weight. In science, proof means a repeatable result that fits a model. In everyday life, belief often means trust without full evidence. An agnostic separates the two, saying that trust in a theory is based on current data, not on an absolute guarantee. This subtle shift helps people avoid the trap of thinking that lack of proof equals proof of lack. Technology adds another layer to the discussion. The internet lets anyone read the latest study on climate change, the genetics of a disease, or the probability of a distant exoplanet. With so much data, the temptation is to think that all answers are at our fingertips. Yet the flood of information also brings misinformation. An agnostic stance encourages checking sources, looking for peer review, and being ready to change a view when new evidence appears. This habit mirrors the scientific method. Hypothesize, test, revise. In the realm of ethics, modern agnosticism asks how to act when certainty is missing. A doctor may not know which treatment will work best for a rare condition, but must choose a plan that offers the most benefit with the least harm. The doctor uses the best available data, explains the risks, and respects the patient's values. This practice reflects the agnostic balance of evidence and humility. The story also touches on the personal side of doubt. Many people feel uneasy when they cannot label their belief. Some say, "I am not sure if there is a God, but I feel something larger than myself." Others say, "I trust the science that tells me the earth is warming, but I do not know the ultimate cause of existence." These statements show that modern agnosticism is not a lack of belief, but a different kind of belief, one that rests on openness and curiosity. A final illustration comes from a simple kitchen experiment. A child mixes baking soda and vinegar and watches the fizz. The child learns that a chemical reaction makes gas, but the child does not yet understand the deeper physics of molecules. The child's wonder stays alive because the answer is not fully known. This mirrors the adult mind that watches a telescope, reads a research paper, or hears a sermon, and still feels the pull of the unknown. In sum, modern agnosticism stands at the crossroads of science, reason, and mystery. It draws on the calm voice of Carl Sagan, the balanced view of Stephen Jay Gould, and the everyday experiences of a scientist testing a medicine, a student guessing on a test, a map guiding a traveler, and a lighthouse warning of hidden rocks. It meets the counter-arguments that science will one day answer all, and that faith fills the gaps, and it offers the language that people use every day can shape the way they think about the biggest questions. Words such as maybe, perhaps, and unknown are tiny, but they carry a lot of weight. When a person says, "Maybe God exists," that single word opens a space for doubt and possibility. When a person says, "The truth is unknown," that phrase invites a search for evidence. In the study of agnosticism, the role of language becomes a central focus. The gentle narrator of this story will walk the viewer through how simple words have guided the thoughts of thinkers, how they appear in everyday life, and how they still matter in modern times. The story of agnosticism begins in the 19th century. Thomas Henry Huxley, a biologist and a close friend of Charles Darwin, first used the word agnostic in an editorial in 1869. He wrote that he could not claim certainty about the existence of God because the evidence was insufficient. He said, "I am an agnostic. I do not claim to know." That short statement set a tone that would echo for more than a century. Huxley's choice of the word agnostic was itself a linguistic move. He wanted a term that would sit between belief and disbelief, a term that would admit uncertainty without forcing a conclusion. By naming the position, he gave language a new shape to hold doubt. Another key thinker, William James, took a different route. James was a psychologist and philosopher who wrote about belief as a habit of the mind. He said, "Our belief is a habit of the mind, formed by repeated acceptance." In plain terms, James meant that people become comfortable with ideas that they repeat often. If a person repeats, "Maybe there is a higher power," that habit can feel stable even without proof. James also noted that language can either tighten or loosen that habit. He warned that overly precise language can trap a person in a single view, while vague language can keep the mind open. James' ideas help the viewer see how everyday words can act like gentle nudges toward or away from certainty. The early use of words like maybe and unknown was not limited to philosophers. In newspapers of the 1800s, editors often wrote about the limits of human knowledge. One editorial in a New York paper in 1884 declared, "The world is full of mysteries, and we must admit what we do not know." That line used the word unknown to remind readers that certainty is rare. By putting unknown in a public forum, the newspaper gave the public permission to live with unanswered questions. The editorial's simple language made the idea of doubt feel respectable, not shameful. Language also appears in classrooms, where young minds first meet the idea of uncertainty. In a high school philosophy class in the 1970s, a teacher asked the students to discuss the statement, "The existence of God is unknown." One student raised his hand and said, "I don't know if God exists, but I can live with that." The teacher replied, "That is the heart of agnosticism, living with the unknown." The classroom scene shows how a single phrase can spark deep reflection. The student's words, "I don't know," became a doorway to a thoughtful stance that does not demand proof, but also does not reject the possibility. These historical moments illustrate how language can shape belief. When a word signals uncertainty, it invites a different kind of thinking. When a word signals certainty, it pushes the mind toward a fixed point. The rest of this segment will explore how those choices play out in everyday life, how they are argued by philosophers, and how they are challenged by critics. One argument for the power of language in agnosticism is that vague words protect freedom of thought. The word maybe does not lock a person into a single answer. It lets the mind wander. A parent who sits on a couch at night, a child curled up with a book, can choose a bedtime story that says, "Maybe the moon is a friendly guardian who watches over you." The parent's choice of the word maybe allows the child to imagine a protective presence without demanding belief in a specific deity. The child can drift to sleep feeling comforted, yet still open to other ideas. The gentle narrator can describe this scene. A mother flips through a shelf, sees a story titled "The Moon's Gentle Light," reads a line that says, "Perhaps the moon is a friend who listens to our dreams." The word perhaps opens a space for wonder. The child's mind stays flexible, ready to accept new ideas as they grow. Another everyday example comes from a shopper in a grocery aisle. The shopper picks up a bottle of herbal tea and reads the label. The label says, "May help you relax." The word "may" signals that the effect is not guaranteed. The shopper, aware of the uncertainty, decides to try the tea, but does not expect a miracle. If the label had said, "will relax you," the shopper might feel misled if the effect did not happen. The subtle shift from "may" to "will" changes the shopper's expectations and the level of trust placed in the product. In this simple scene, the word "may" mirrors the agnostic stance, an acceptance that the outcome is uncertain, but still worth exploring. These two scenes show how everyday language can shape belief in small, concrete ways. The parent's choice of maybe or perhaps creates a gentle space for a child's imagination. The shopper's encounter with may keeps expectations realistic. Both examples illustrate that language does not just describe reality. It helps build it. Philosophers have built arguments around this idea. One line of thought holds that language is a tool that can either clarify or cloud truth. If a person uses precise language, they can reduce doubt. For instance, a scientist might say, "The experiment shows a 95% chance of this result." That precise figure aims to eliminate uncertainty. Some argue that such precision can also reduce the space for agnosticism. By stating a number, the speaker claims a level of certainty that leaves little room for maybe. The argument is that precise language pushes people toward belief in what is measured and away from the unknown. A second line of thought counters that precise language can sometimes create false confidence. When a person says, I know the answer. The word know implies absolute certainty. In many cases, the knowledge is limited, but the language hides that limitation. Critics of precise language say that it can close the door to further inquiry. By insisting on exact terms, a speaker may ignore the complexity of the issue. The counter-argument is that vague language, like maybe, protects the mind from premature closure. It keeps the door open for new evidence and new ideas. In the realm of agnosticism, this view suggests that a little vagueness is healthy. These counter-arguments form a lively debate. The first side says that clarity eliminates doubt and helps people act. The second side says that a little fuzziness keeps the mind free. Both sides use language as their main point. The narrator can guide the viewer through this tension, showing how each side sees words as either a bridge or a barrier. Modern interpretations of this debate have moved into the digital world. Online forums are full of posts that start with, "I'm not sure, but," or "maybe we should consider." The use of maybe in a comment can signal openness, inviting others to share their thoughts. In contrast, posts that declare "it is proven that" often shut down discussion. Social media platforms have even created features that label content as unverified or verified. Those labels are a modern form of the word unknown. When a post is marked unverified, the platform tells the reader that the truth is not yet known. This labeling shapes how people think about the information. The modern viewer can see how a simple tag influences belief, just as a 19th century editorial used unknown to invite humility. Artificial intelligence adds another layer. When a chatbot says, "I'm not sure," it mirrors the agnostic stance. The machine's admission of uncertainty can make users feel more comfortable asking follow-up questions. If the machine instead said, "I know," users might trust it too much, even when the answer is wrong. The language of the machine thus mirrors the same philosophical tension seen in human conversation. Real-world applications extend beyond the home and the store. In medicine, doctors often say, "This treatment may help." The word "may" keeps patients aware that success is not guaranteed. In law, judges sometimes write, "The facts are unknown." That phrase signals that the court cannot decide without more evidence. In both fields, the choice of words protects against false certainty while still allowing action. The viewer can see that the language of agnosticism is not just a philosophical curiosity. It is a practical tool used in many professions. Analogies help illustrate the power of language. Imagine a dim lamp in a room. The lamp casts soft light that lets a person see shapes, but not details. The word maybe acts like that dim lamp. It gives enough light to see that something might be there, but not enough to see it clearly. Now imagine a bright floodlight. The floodlight reveals every detail, leaving no shadows. The word certain works like the floodlight, removing doubt, but also removing mystery. Both lights have uses, but they create different experiences. The gentle narrator can ask the viewer to picture the two lights and think about which one feels more comfortable in different situations. Another analogy uses a road map. A map that says, "The road may lead to the lake," tells a traveler that the destination is possible, but not guaranteed. The traveler stays alert, ready for turns. A map that says, "The road leads to the lake," gives a fixed direction, which can be useful but also risky if the road changes. In the same way, language that includes maybe keeps the traveler aware of change, while language that declares certainty can lead to disappointment if the road shifts. Historical anecdotes add color to the discussion. In 1889, a small town in England printed a pamphlet titled The Unknown and the Known. The pamphlet argued that the community should accept the unknown as a part of daily life. It quoted a local minister who said, "We live in a world where some things are hidden, and that is not." Agnosticism began as a word that meant not knowing. It first appeared in the middle of the 19th century. Thomas Henry Huxley chose the word to describe his view that no one could prove the existence or non-existence of God. He said, "I am agnostic. I cannot claim certainty about what lies beyond the limits of experience." Huxley's idea was not a denial of belief. It was a statement that the mind should stay open when evidence is missing. Another early voice was the philosopher William James. He wrote about the will to believe. James argued that when evidence is incomplete, a person may choose a belief that helps life, but he also warned against blind faith. He said, "Our passional nature not only lawfully may, but must, decide what we shall believe when evidence fails." James' words show that agnostic thinking can be a tool for everyday choice. In modern times, Sam Harris speaks about doubt in a plain way. Harris says that it is better to admit uncertainty than to cling to a claim that cannot be proved. He often talks about how this habit can improve politics, health, and technology. His style fits the calm voice of the channel. Agnostic thinking shows up in small decisions. Imagine a person who wants to eat out but has no online review for a new restaurant. The mind does not have a clear answer. The person can ask, "What do I know about this place?" If the only facts are the menu and the price, the decision rests on limited data. An agnostic approach says, "I do not have enough proof that the food will be good, so I will try it and see." This choice accepts uncertainty and moves forward. A second example is choosing whether to trust a new app that promises to track health data. The phone shows a bright logo and a list of features, but there are no independent tests yet. The person may think, "I cannot be sure it protects my privacy." An agnostic stance would be to use the app only for a short trial, to watch for any problems, and to keep a backup plan. The person does not jump to full trust, nor does he reject the tool outright. Everyday voting is another place where agnostic thinking matters. Voters rarely have perfect knowledge about every policy. They hear promises, see headlines, and read some statistics. An agnostic voter says, "I do not know enough to be certain which candidate is best, but I can compare the facts I have and make a choice." This attitude helps people avoid paralysis while still staying honest about the limits of their knowledge. Healthcare decisions also reflect agnosticism. A patient may read about a new treatment that claims to cure a disease. The research is still early, and the side effects are not fully known. The patient can say, "I cannot be sure this will work for me." The patient may then ask the doctor for more data, try a small dose, or wait for further studies. The choice respects uncertainty and still moves toward a decision. One common counterargument says that certainty is needed for strong action. Some say if you are not sure, you will not act, and the world will suffer. This claim appears in political speeches that demand firm belief in a cause. The argument is that doubt weakens resolve. A second counterargument says that doubt leads to paralysis. It claims that people who keep questioning will never finish a task. The idea is that too much questioning stops any progress. Both claims try to push people toward absolute belief. Agnostic thinkers answer the first claim by pointing to history. In the 1980s, a small town in Ohio held a town hall meeting about a new factory. Some residents wanted the jobs, others feared pollution. No one had a perfect forecast. The mayor said, "We do not know everything, but we can weigh the facts we have." The town voted to allow the factory with strict environmental rules. The decision showed that action can be taken without full certainty. The outcome was mixed, but the town moved forward and later adjusted the rules when new data arrived. The second counterargument meets a story from a family dinner in the 1990s. A teenage daughter asked whether she should accept a scholarship to study abroad. Her parents argued that she should decide quickly, fearing that doubt would waste the chance. The daughter replied, "I am not sure if I will like a new country, but I can research, talk to alumni, and try a short visit." She spent a month gathering information, then chose to go. The experience turned out well, and the family saw that careful doubt did not stop her from acting. These anecdotes illustrate that doubt can be a guide, not a roadblock. Agnosticism does not ask people to stop acting. It asks them to act with awareness of what is unknown. This awareness can improve the quality of the action. An analogy helps to see the idea. Think of a sailor on a foggy sea. The sailor cannot see the shore, but he can read the compass, watch the wind, and feel the waves. He does not claim to know exactly where the land lies, yet he moves forward, adjusting the course as new signs appear. Agnostic thinking works like that sailor. It accepts that the view is limited, but it still steers the ship. Another analogy compares the mind to a garden. When a gardener plants a seed, he cannot guarantee which flowers will bloom. He knows the soil, the water, and the sunlight, but the exact outcome remains uncertain. He still plants, watches, and tends. In the same way, a person can plant ideas, test them, and tend to them, even when the final result is unknown. Modern philosophers build on Huxley and James. Some argue that agnosticism is a method, not just a belief about God. They say it can be used in science, law, and everyday life. For example, a scientist may say, "The data are not yet enough to confirm this theory, so we remain agnostic." This stance keeps research honest and open to new evidence. In the field of technology, ethicists use agnostic language when discussing AI. They note that we cannot predict all impacts of a new algorithm. They advise that designers stay agnostic about outcomes, test the system, and revise as needed. This approach mirrors the restaurant and app examples. Agnostic thinking also appears in economics. Consumers often face products with limited reviews. They may decide to buy a phone after checking the brand's history, even though they cannot be sure the new model will last. The decision reflects a balance between doubt and need. In politics, leaders sometimes claim absolute truth to rally supporters. An agnostic politician, however, would say, "We have strong evidence for this policy, but we remain open to change if new facts appear." This style can build trust with voters who feel overwhelmed by false certainty. The word agnostic can be misunderstood. Some think it means no belief at all. In fact, it means no claim of certainty. A person can still have a preference, a hope, or a plan. The key is to admit that the plan rests on incomplete proof. This honesty can reduce conflict. When two people recognize that each side is working with limited knowledge, they can talk more calmly. A quote from Huxley captures this idea. "The great tragedy of science, the slaying of a beautiful hypothesis by a small fact." The quote reminds that a single fact can overturn a strong belief. Agnosticism keeps the mind ready for that fact. Another quote from William James adds depth. Believe that which, if true, makes a difference. Doubt that which, if false, makes no difference. This line suggests that belief should be saved for things that matter most, while doubt is safe for less important claims. In daily life, this can guide choices about food, apps, or votes. A real-world application in healthcare shows the balance. A doctor may recommend a vaccine that has strong data, but also note the rare side effects. The patient hears both the certainty of protection and the uncertainty of risk. The patient then decides using both pieces of information. The process reflects agnostic thinking. Trust the strong evidence, stay aware of the unknown. In the world of finance, an investor may buy a stock after reading a few reports. The investor cannot know the future market, but can weigh the known trends. The investor says, "I am not sure this will rise, but I have enough reason to try." This attitude mirrors the restaurant choice. Agnostic thinking also shapes education. Teachers often ask students to consider multiple viewpoints. They do not tell students that one answer is the only truth, but they give evidence and let students decide. This method teaches students to live with doubt and still act. A modern commentator, Sam Harris, often talks about the value of doubt in politics. He says that when leaders claim absolute certainty, they close off discussion. He points out that a leader who admits uncertainty can invite better ideas. This view supports the idea that agnosticism can improve democracy. The claim that certainty is needed for strong action can be seen in some activist groups. They chant slogans that leave no room for questioning. While the chant can energize, it can also push people away who feel unsure. Agnostics argue that a movement can stay strong while allowing questions, because the core values are based on shared evidence, not blind belief. The claim that doubt leads to paralysis appears in self-help books that urge just do it. Those books warn that overthinking stops progress. Agnostics respond that thoughtful doubt is different from endless rumination. The sailor on the foggy sea does not wait forever. He moves while checking the compass. A final anecdote comes from a small town meeting in 1985 in a Midwestern city. The council discussed whether to fund a new library. Some citizens wanted the building, others worried about taxes. No one had a perfect projection of future use. The council leader said, "We cannot know exactly how many people will read, but we can look at current demand and plan for growth." The town approved the library, and years later it became a hub for community learning. The decision shows that agnostic thinking can lead to lasting benefit. Another family story happened at a dinner in 1998. A brother argued that a new diet pill was safe because the advertisement said clinically tested. The sister replied, "We do not have the study, so we cannot be sure." They decided to wait for an independent review before buying. The pill later turned out to have side effects. Their agnostic pause saved them from harm. These stories, analogies, and quotes all point to a simple pattern. When a person faces a choice, they first notice what is known. Then they note what is unknown. They keep the unknown in mind, but they do not let it stop them. They act, they observe, and they adjust. This pattern is the heart of agnostic thinking in daily life. In a voting booth, a citizen may read a candidate's platform, see the polls, and hear friends' opinions. The citizen cannot be sure which promise will be kept. Yet the citizen can still vote, because the act of voting is a way to shape the future, even if the outcome is uncertain. The citizen's agnostic stance respects the limits of knowledge while still participating. In health decisions, a patient may weigh the benefits of a new medication against the unknown long-term effects. The patient can choose to try a lower dose, monitor results, and switch if needed. This approach follows the same pattern as trying a new restaurant without a review. The person does not need perfect certainty to make a move. Agnosticism also appears in the way people treat information on the internet. When a new app appears, the user may read the terms, check the developer's history, and test a few features. The user does not claim the app is safe, but also does not reject it outright. The user stays open, learns, and decides. Modern philosophers who write about agnosticism often link it to epistemic humility. This phrase means that the mind should stay humble about what it knows. It is a simple way to the voice that guides this part of the story moves slowly, like a calm river. It speaks about the doubts that sit beside belief, and about the questions that push people to look for meaning. In this segment, the focus is on the criticisms that have been aimed at agnosticism. Both the faithful and the strict skeptics have raised concerns. The words of a small-town pastor and a high school science teacher will be heard. Simple stories about a child at bedtime and a sports fan will help the listener feel the ideas in daily life. Two historical scenes, one from a 1920s revival meeting and one from an online forum in the early 2000s, will give a sense of how the debate has lived on. Finally, two replies that defend agnosticism will be offered. The whole piece stays in plain language, with short sentences and no fancy jargon. A pastor named Mark lives in a quiet county. He leads a small congregation that meets in a modest brick building. He often says that faith is a gift. He believes that a person must choose to trust God. He tells his flock that doubt is a slippery road. He says, if one does not hold fast to the truth, one will wander forever. He has heard the word agnostic many times. He thinks it is a way to hide behind uncertainty. He feels that the word makes people avoid a clear choice. He says that a person who says, I do not know, is missing the chance to be saved. He points to the Bible, to the verse that says, the Lord is near to all who call on him, Psalm 45:8. He believes that a person can hear that call if they open their heart. He worries that agnostics stay stuck in the middle, never moving toward God or away from him. Mark's friend, a science teacher named Linda, works at the local high school. She teaches biology and chemistry. She often talks about evidence and experiments. She says that the world follows rules that can be tested. She has heard the same word agnostic from students who are unsure about religion. She says, agnosticism sounds like a safe answer. It says, I don't know, and then it stops looking. She worries that the word can become a shield. She tells her class that good science never stops asking questions. She believes that saying, I don't know, should be a step toward finding out, not a final stop. She often quotes the physicist Albert Einstein. The important thing is not to stop questioning. She thinks that agnostics sometimes settle for a quiet middle ground, and that can stop progress. Both Mark and Linda represent two common voices of criticism. One comes from the side of faith. The other comes from the side of hardcore skepticism. Their words are simple, but they echo a larger conversation that has been happening for decades. The first criticism from believers focuses on certainty. It says that belief in God gives a firm foundation. It says that without that foundation, life feels like a ship without a compass. A believer may say, if you do not know the truth, you cannot act on it. The argument is that certainty guides moral choices. It guides how a person treats others. It guides how a person finds purpose. If a person says, I am not sure, the critic says, you may drift. The critic also says that faith gives hope. A person who believes that there is a purpose beyond this life can face hardship with a calm heart. The critic claims that agnosticism can leave a person without that hope. The critic may quote a line from the Bible. For I know the plans I have for you, says God. Jeremiah 29:1. The critic says that this promise is only real for those who accept it. The second criticism comes from the hardcore skeptics. These are people who demand proof for every claim. They often say that agnosticism is a half-hearted stance. They argue that if a claim cannot be proven, it should be set aside. A skeptic may say, agnosticism is a polite way of saying, I have no evidence, but I will not say it is false. The skeptic claims that this is an intellectual shortcut. The skeptic says that the world is full of false ideas that hide behind uncertainty. The skeptic may point to the phrase, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. The skeptic says that agnostics sometimes hide behind that phrase instead of demanding proof. The skeptic also says that agnosticism can be used to avoid taking a stand on important issues, such as climate change or human rights. The skeptic may quote a line from the philosopher David Hume. A wise man proportions his belief to the evidence. The skeptic says that agnostics sometimes ignore the need for proportion. These two criticisms are often heard in everyday conversation. A local pastor may stand at a pulpit and say, agnosticism is a middle road that leads nowhere. A science teacher may stand in front of a lab and say, agnosticism can become a comfort zone that stops curiosity. Both use simple language. Both use a tone that feels like a warning. To make the ideas more concrete, the script offers a child who needs bedtime reassurance. The child lies in a small bed, eyes wide, hearing the night sounds. The child asks, will there be monsters? Will the world end? The parent says, there is no need to fear. The world is safe. The parent gives a clear answer that the child can hold. The child feels calm and can sleep. If the parent said, I don't know if there are monsters, the child would stay awake, worrying. The parent's certainty gives the child a sense of safety. This story shows why some believers think that certainty matters. It also shows why a skeptic might say that the parent's answer is not based on proof, but on belief. Another story involves a sports fan named Alex. Alex loves a local football team. The coach announces a new play. Alex trusts the coach's plan. He believes that the coach knows the field, the opponents, and the players. Alex says, I trust the coach. He will lead us to victory. The coach's plan gives Alex excitement and hope. If Alex said, I don't know if this play will work, so I will not get excited, his enthusiasm would fade. The fan's trust in a plan mirrors the way believers trust in a divine plan. It also shows how a person can find meaning by committing to a choice. These two examples illustrate why some people fear that agnosticism can leave a person without the comfort that certainty provides. They also show that the search for meaning often involves choosing a side, even if the choice is not fully proven. Now the script moves to the two historical anecdotes that bring the debate into a larger time frame. The first anecdote goes back to a revival meeting in 1925. In a small town in the American South, a preacher named Billy James stood on a wooden platform. The crowd was packed in a wooden church with stained glass windows that had seen many generations. The preacher raised his voice and said, "The Lord is calling you today. Do you hear him?" He told a story about a farmer who prayed for rain and saw clouds gather. He said that faith can move mountains. In the middle of his sermon, a young man named Thomas raised his hand. Thomas said, "I have doubts. I hear about God, but I do not see him." The preacher answered, "You must choose. Either you trust him or you stay in darkness." The crowd cheered. The meeting ended with many people shouting, "Amen," and some people weeping. The story of Thomas shows how, in that era, doubt was treated as a problem to be solved. The preacher's words made it clear that the community expected a firm answer. The anecdote shows how the criticism that agnosticism is a middle road that leads nowhere was lived out in a public setting. The second anecdote moves forward to the early 2000s. In an online forum called Philosophy Talk, a thread began with the title, "Is agnosticism a real position?" The thread attracted many users from different backgrounds. One user, Skeptical Sam, wrote, "If you cannot prove God does not exist, then you are just avoiding the issue." Another user, Faithful Mike, replied, "Agnosticism is a way to stay comfortable without committing to truth." The discussion grew heated. A third user, Open Mind, posted a long comment that said, "Agnosticism can be a healthy stance. It keeps the mind open to new evidence." The forum kept the conversation going for weeks. Users quoted philosophers, scientists, and religious texts. The thread ended when the moderators closed it for being too long. The anecdote shows how, in the digital age, the same criticisms appear, but now they travel across the world in seconds. It also shows that people still argue about whether agnosticism is a real position or just a way to avoid choosing. Both anecdotes give a sense of how the debate has moved from a wooden pulpit to a glowing screen. But the core arguments remain similar. The criticisms from believers and skeptics have traveled through time. Now the script offers two counter-arguments that defend agnosticism. These are presented in a calm, balanced way. The first defense says that openness keeps the mind flexible. It says that when a person says, "I do not know," they stay ready to hear new evidence. It says that a closed mind can miss truth. It says that flexibility allows a person to change their view when new facts appear. The defense quotes the philosopher Thomas Huxley, who first used the word agnostic. Huxley said, "In this century, the great tragedy of mankind is that we have lost the habit of being honest about what we do not know." The defense says that honesty about uncertainty is a virtue. It says that this honesty can lead to better learning. It says that a person who stays open can grow. The second defense says that admitting uncertainty can be honest. It says that many people pretend to know more than they do. It says that pretending to have certainty can cause harm. It says that honesty about doubt can build trust. It says that when a person says, "I am not sure," they invite others to share their views. The defense quotes a line from C.S. Lewis, who wrote, "I am trying here to give you a plain account of my own doubts." Lewis was a Christian, but he was honest about his doubts. The defense says that this honesty can help people see that doubt is a normal part of the human experience. It says that agnosticism can be a bridge between faith and skepticism, because it does not force a side. These two defenses show that agnosticism can have a purpose. It can keep the mind open and can be a sign of honesty. The defenses do not claim that agnosticism has all the answers. They simply say that it can be a useful stance when evidence is lacking. The script now returns to the voices of Mark the pastor and Linda the science teacher, showing how they might respond to the defenses. Mark listens to the idea that openness is good. He says, openness is fine, but it must lead to a decision. A person cannot stay forever in a waiting room. He points to the story of Abraham. The story of agnosticism is not a story of a single person or a single place. It is a story that stretches across many lands, many languages, many ways of seeing the world. It is a story of people who notice that the big questions about gods, about the afterlife, about the meaning of life often stay out of reach. In many cultures, the answer to those questions is not a firm yes or a firm no, but a quiet pause, a humble admission that the answer may be beyond the reach of human minds. In the ancient hills of the Indian subcontinent, the idea that knowledge has limits appears in the Upanishads. One verse says, "The self is not known by the mind, nor can the mind know the self." That line does not claim that the self does not exist, only that the mind cannot fully grasp it. In the same way, a Hindu village elder named Ram often tells the younger people that the gods are like the wind. "You can feel the wind on your face," he says, "but you cannot see it. You can hear the leaves move, but you cannot hold the wind." That image is an everyday analogy that helps the villagers live with uncertainty. It is not a denial of the wind, but a reminder that certainty is not always possible. A few centuries later, in the bustling markets of medieval Baghdad, scholars began to ask similar questions. The Persian philosopher Al-Ghazali wrote about the limits of human reason when he said, "The certainty of the heart is not the certainty of the intellect." He was pointing out that faith and reason can travel different paths. In the same city, a merchant named Yusuf would often listen to travelers from far lands. When a caravan from China spoke of a single, all-powerful ruler of the heavens, Yusuf would smile and reply, "We have many gods, and many ways to speak of them. Perhaps the truth is like a river that splits into many streams." In Europe, the word agnostic was first used in the 19th century by Thomas Henry Huxley, a biologist who worked with Charles Darwin. Huxley wrote, "In this century, the great question has become not whether there is a God, but whether man can know." He chose the word agnostic from the Greek word agnostos, meaning unknown. Huxley's simple statement set a tone that would echo through later thinkers. He was not saying that God does not exist, only that we cannot be sure. His friend, the poet Matthew Arnold, later wrote, "We are not certain of the shape of the world, but we can see the stars." That line shows how the idea of uncertainty can sit alongside a love of the world. The spread of agnostic ideas did not happen in a straight line. It moved along trade routes, along the lines of empire, along the paths of students who left home to study elsewhere. In the 1950s, a young American exchange student named Clara wrote a letter home from a small town in southern India. She wrote, "The village elder told me that the gods are like the rain. We pray for rain, but we also plant seeds and wait. We do not know when the rain will come, but we work anyway." Clara's letter was later published in a university magazine and sparked interest among other students. The letter showed that a simple everyday conversation could carry a deep philosophical point. It also showed how a culture that lives with uncertainty can still act responsibly. A modern journalist named Maya works for an online news outlet that covers cultural stories across the globe. Maya often interviews people about their beliefs. In one interview, she asks a secular European professor, "Do you think your culture gives you answers about the divine?" The professor replies, "Our culture gives us many stories, but it does not hand us a final answer. It asks us to keep asking." Maya writes, "In a world where ideas travel fast, the space for uncertainty can feel both precious and fragile." Her article is read by thousands of readers who see that the question of certainty is still alive today. Everyday examples help make the abstract ideas clearer. Imagine a traveler named Amir who moves from a coastal town in Morocco to a mountain village in Nepal. Amir learns that the locals greet the sunrise with a chant that thanks the sun for its light. He does not know if the sun is a god, a star, or a symbol. He watches the chant, feels the warmth, and thinks, "I can respect the chant without knowing the full truth." Amir's story shows how a person can live with uncertainty while still taking part in local customs. Another everyday scene shows a student named Lena, who is writing a paper on holiday stories. Lena compares the story of Christmas in her family, which talks about a baby born in a stable, with the story of Diwali in her friend's family, which tells of a lamp that lights the darkness. Lena notices that both stories speak of light coming into darkness, but neither story claims a single final answer about the nature of that light. She writes, "Both stories teach hope, and both leave room for mystery." Lena's comparison shows how different cultures can hold similar values while still accepting that the deeper truth may be unknown. The arguments for agnosticism often start with the idea that human knowledge is limited. One common line of reasoning says that because the world changes, any claim about the ultimate nature of reality can be proved wrong later. For example, the ancient Greeks thought that the Earth was the center of the universe. That belief was later replaced by a heliocentric model. The lesson is that what seems certain today may be revised tomorrow. Therefore, it is safer to stay open to doubt. Another argument points to the variety of religious claims. In one part of the world, people speak of many gods with many names. In another part, people speak of one god with one name. If both groups claim that their god is the only true one, then at least one of them must be wrong. Since the claims directly conflict, the safest position is to admit that the truth is unknown. This is sometimes called the argument from religious diversity. Two counterarguments often appear in discussions about agnosticism. The first claim is that culture itself provides built-in answers. A cultural elder might say, "Our stories have been passed down for generations. They are the answer to the big questions." In this view, the community's traditions act as a guide, and doubt is seen as a threat to social harmony. The second claim is that global dialogue erodes local belief. Critics say that when people share ideas across borders, the unique beliefs of a small community can be diluted. They argue that the spread of agnostic ideas can weaken the bonds that hold a culture together. The first counterargument can be examined through a story from the 1800s. In a remote village in the Andes, a priest named Don Miguel taught that the mountains were the home of a single god who watched over the people. When a traveler from the city arrived and asked questions about other gods, Don Miguel responded, "Our mountains have spoken to us. The answer is here in the stone." The villagers accepted this answer without question, and the community stayed united. This anecdote shows how a built-in answer can give a sense of stability. The second counterargument is illustrated by a modern event. In 2010, a multicultural festival in a European city invited speakers from many faiths and also from non-faith backgrounds. During a panel discussion, a young activist named Sam said, When we hear all these different stories, we lose the old ways that made us who we are. Some older audience members nodded, fearing that the mix of ideas would blur their traditions. The panel, however, also featured a storyteller from a small island who explained how sharing stories helped his community keep its language alive, because the stories were recorded in new languages. The event showed both the fear of loss and the potential for preservation through dialogue. Real applications of agnostic thinking appear in many fields. In science, researchers often work with hypotheses that may never be fully proven. They keep testing, keep questioning, and accept that some answers may remain out of reach. In law, judges sometimes have to rule on cases where the evidence is incomplete. They may say, "We cannot know everything, but we must decide based on what we have." In everyday life, a parent may tell a child, "We do not know why some things happen, but we can help each other." These examples show that living with uncertainty can be a practical skill, not just an abstract idea. Modern interpretations of agnosticism have taken new forms. Some people call themselves spiritual, but not religious, meaning they feel a sense of wonder but do not commit to a specific doctrine. Others use the term skeptical theist, a philosopher who believes a God may exist but thinks the reasons are hidden from us. In the digital age, online forums allow people from different backgrounds to discuss their doubts openly. A user named Quiet Mind wrote on a forum, "I respect the stories I hear, but I keep a space for the unknown." The comment received many likes, showing that many people value the balance between belief and doubt. An analogy that helps clarify agnosticism compares it to weather forecasting. A meteorologist can look at clouds, wind, temperature, and give a forecast. The forecast may be 80% accurate, but there is always a chance of surprise. The forecaster does not claim to know the exact weather for every minute, but still provides useful information. Similarly, an agnostic can say, "We have many clues about the divine, but we cannot be sure." The analogy keeps the idea grounded in everyday experience. Another analogy uses the image of a library. A library contains many books on many subjects. Some books are about history, some about science, some about myths. A reader can browse, read, and learn, but the library does not guarantee that any one book holds the final truth about everything. The reader must accept that some questions may have no single answer in the collection. This image mirrors the way cultures store many stories about the divine, each offering a piece of a larger puzzle. Historical anecdotes add depth to the discussion. In the early 1900s, a Buddhist monk named Ananda traveled to Japan to study Zen. He wrote in his journal, "The masters speak of emptiness, but they also speak of compassion. The emptiness is not a void, it is a space for possibility." Ananda's note shows how a tradition can hold both a sense of mystery and a clear ethical guide. It also shows that the idea of not knowing can coexist with strong moral action. A second anecdote comes from the 1960s, when a group of African scholars gathered at a conference in Nairobi to discuss the role of religion in post-colonial societies. One scholar, Dr. Kamau, said, "Our ancestors asked the sky why the rains fell. We now ask the sky why we suffer. The answer may never be clear, but the question keeps us moving." The conference minutes recorded his words, and they have been quoted in later works on agnosticism in Africa. The anecdote illustrates how the question of certainty travels across time and space. Quotes from primary sources help anchor the ideas. Thomas Huxley wrote, "We must not pretend that we have the final word. The Upanishad says, "He who knows the self knows the unknown." The Quran includes the line, "And they ask you about the unseen. Say, it is beyond my knowledge." Each quote comes from a different tradition, yet each points to the same humility before the unknown. In a modern setting, a secular philosopher named Elena wrote in a blog, "The world is full of stories. Some are true, some are not, and some we cannot test. The space between them is where curiosity lives." Her words echo the ancient idea that uncertainty can be a place. The voice of the narrator begins gently, inviting the listener to sit with a question that never fully settles. What does it mean to live with uncertainty? The answer is not a single rule, but a set of habits that help the mind stay calm when certainty is out of reach. In this part of the video, the focus is on practical ways to embrace agnostic thinking. The tools are simple, the stories are real, and the advice comes from people who have tried it in everyday life. The story of agnosticism starts in the mid-19th century. In 1869, a biologist named Thomas Henry Huxley coined the word agnostic to describe a method of thinking that does not claim to know what cannot be proved. He wrote, "I am not an atheist, but I am not a theist either. I claim no knowledge about the existence of God." That short line captures the core idea. A willingness to admit lack of knowledge while still staying open to new evidence. Huxley's method was not a denial of belief, but a call for intellectual honesty. He wanted people to stop pretending they knew the answer when the answer was hidden. Another early voice was the philosopher William James. In his essay, The Will to Believe, James argued that it is sometimes reasonable to make a choice even without full proof, as long as the choice does not hurt anyone and the person can live with the outcome. James said, "Our passional nature not only lawfully may, but must, decide what we shall believe when evidence is insufficient." James did not reject agnosticism. He simply pointed out that people often have to act before they have all the facts. His words remind the listener that uncertainty does not freeze life. From those origins, agnostic thinking spread into many fields. In psychology, researchers talk about intellectual humility, the ability to see one's own limits. In everyday life, this humility shows up as asking open-ended questions instead of demanding quick answers. A simple question like, "What might be another way to look at this?" can open a room for new ideas. That habit is one of the tools the narrator will share. The first tool is mindfulness. Mindfulness means paying attention to the present moment without judging what is there. When doubt rises, the mind often jumps to worst-case scenarios. A short breathing exercise can slow that rush. The narrator suggests a 3-minute practice. Sit comfortably, close the eyes, breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 2, breathe out for 6, and repeat. While breathing, notice each thought about certainty or uncertainty as if it were a cloud passing by. No need to chase the cloud or argue with it. This simple practice helps the brain stay calm, making space for thoughtful questions instead of panic. The second tool is the use of open-ended questions. Instead of asking, "Is this true or false?" one can ask, "What evidence do we have?" or "What would change our view?" These questions do not demand a yes or no answer, and they keep the conversation moving. The narrator gives an example. A friend wonders whether a new diet works. Rather than demanding a proof, the friend can ask, "What have people said about how they feel after trying it?" This invites stories, data, and personal experience, all of which enrich the discussion. A third tool is community practice. A local workshop called Living with Uncertainty meets once a month in many towns. The workshop runs for an hour, and participants share a doubt they face, then practice mindfulness together, and finally try to reframe the doubt with an open question. The format is simple enough that anyone can join. The narrator mentions that the workshop has grown from a single room in a library to a network of over 100 groups across the country. The community aspect helps people see that doubt is common, not a personal flaw. The fourth tool is a popular podcast called The Open Mind. Each episode features a guest who talks about a personal struggle with uncertainty, whether about faith, career, or health. The host always ends with a short guided meditation and a question for listeners to try during the week. The narrator notes that the podcast averages over 1 million downloads per month, showing that many people look for gentle guidance when certainty feels out of reach. To see these tools in action, the narrator paints 2 everyday scenarios. In the first, a family plans a vacation to the coast. Instead of booking a strict schedule, they decide to keep the itinerary open. They set a base camp, pick a few must-see spots, and leave the rest to chance. On the second day, a sudden rainstorm blocks the planned hike. Because the plan was loose, the family simply moves to a nearby museum, enjoys a local cafe, and writes a quick note about the unexpected change. The experience becomes a story they tell for years, and the openness turns a possible disappointment into a surprise adventure. The narrator points out that this flexible planning mirrors agnostic thinking. It accepts that the future cannot be fully known, yet it still moves forward with purpose. In the second scenario, a person receives a health scare, a test result that is unclear. The immediate reaction is fear and a rush to find a definitive answer. The narrator suggests using mindfulness to calm the heart, then asking open-ended questions such as, what does the doctor need to confirm? And what are the possible next steps? By staying open, the person avoids jumping to the worst outcome and instead creates a plan that includes more information and time. The story shows that agnostic tools can help in moments that feel life-changing. Now the narrator turns to the counter-arguments that often appear when agnosticism is discussed. One common view is that too much openness leads to indecision. Critics say that if a person always says, "I don't know," they will never act. They point to a business leader who missed a market opportunity because he kept waiting for perfect data. The narrator acknowledges that indecision can be a problem, but offers a nuance. The problem is not openness itself, but a lack of balance. The narrator explains that agnostic thinking pairs openness with a willingness to act on the best available evidence. In the business case, the leader could have used the same open question approach. What does the current data suggest? And then taken a measured step, rather than waiting for certainty that may never arrive. A second counterargument is that firm belief builds confidence. Some say that a strong belief, even if not proven, gives people a solid foundation to face challenges. A soldier, for example, may rely on a belief in a cause to keep moving forward in battle. The narrator does not dismiss this point. Instead, the narrator notes that confidence can also arise from trusting one's process. A person who practices mindfulness and open questioning can feel secure because they know how to handle doubt, not because they cling to a fixed idea. The narrator cites a study where participants who practiced intellectual humility reported higher life satisfaction than those who held rigid beliefs, even when facing the same stressors. Historical anecdotes help illustrate how agnostic tools have been used before the term existed. In 1995, a self-help book titled The Comfort of Not Knowing launched at a small independent bookstore in Portland. The author, a former therapist, wrote about using daily journaling to record questions rather than answers. At the launch, a reader asked, "Will this book tell me the truth about God?" The author replied, "It will help you learn how to sit with the question." The event drew a crowd of over 300 people, many of whom said the book changed how they faced uncertainty. The anecdote shows that the practice of embracing doubt has been popular for decades. A more recent anecdote comes from a 2022 online challenge called 30 Days of Open Questions. Participants posted one open-ended question each day on social media, ranging from "What does happiness look like for you?" to "How might we imagine a future without borders?" The challenge attracted thousands of entries, and many participants reported feeling less pressure to have the right answer. The narrator notes that the challenge's success demonstrates how a simple habit can shift a whole community toward a more open mindset. Real-world applications of agnostic thinking appear in many fields. In science, researchers often publish null results, which are findings that show no effect. Publishing these results is an act of honesty about what is not known, and it helps the whole field avoid false confidence. In law, judges sometimes issue rulings that leave room for future interpretation, acknowledging that the law cannot predict every scenario. In education, teachers who ask students, "What do you think might happen next?" encourage curiosity rather than memorization. Each example shows that living with uncertainty can be a strength, not a weakness. Modern interpretations of agnosticism have expanded beyond religion. Some philosophers talk about epistemic agnosticism, which means admitting that knowledge has limits in any area, from science to politics. Others use practical agnosticism, which focuses on how to act when facts are incomplete. The narrator mentions a contemporary thinker, Dr. Maya Patel, who writes that the best decisions come from a blend of humility and action. Her work is often cited in business blogs and leadership seminars, showing that the idea has moved into everyday language. Analogies help the listener picture the concept. One analogy compares agnostic thinking to a weather forecast. A forecast never promises perfect accuracy. It says there is a 60% chance of rain. A person who plans a picnic based on that forecast can bring an umbrella just in case. The forecast does not stop the person from going outside. It simply adds a layer of preparation. In the same way, agnostic thinking adds a layer of readiness without stopping action. Another analogy likens the mind to a garden. If a gardener tries to control every weed, the garden becomes rigid and fragile. If the gardener allows some weeds to grow, the garden stays adaptable and can handle change. Agnostic thinking is like allowing the garden to have space for unknown plants. The mind stays flexible and can adjust when new information appears. The narrator now brings in a quote from Huxley that ties the ideas together. The great tragedy of science, the slaying of a beautiful hypothesis by a single fact, should not frighten us. It should remind us that knowledge is always provisional. This line reminds listeners that even in science, certainty is temporary, and that is why tools like mindfulness and open questions are valuable. The narrator also shares a quote from the Buddhist tradition, which, while not a primary source of agnosticism, aligns with its spirit. When the mind is free from fixed views, it can see clearly. The quote is simple and fits the calm tone of the video. To help the listener put these ideas into daily practice, The narrator offers a short guide. First, each morning, spend 2 minutes breathing and noting any doubts that arise. Second, write down one open-ended question about that doubt. Third, choose one small action based on the best current information. Fourth, at the end of the day, reflect on how the action felt. A week. These steps become a habit that builds confidence in uncertainty. The guide can be shared in the community workshop